Terrence Hall reached the counter and slid a folded check across the marble surface, along with his driver's license, the way he'd done at this exact branch dozens of times over 6 years. The bank was moderately busy for a mid-afternoon Tuesday. 3 lines forming behind the roped stanchions, the low hum of conversation, and the soft electronic beeps of card readers. The specific, unremarkable atmosphere of a place where money moved back and forth all day without anyone thinking twice about it. Terrence had waited his turn patiently, checked his phone twice, nodded politely to the older woman ahead of him in line who'd complimented his boots without knowing why they were dusty. He wore his Hall Structural Consulting polo, the company logo embroidered small and unassuming on the left chest, jeans with a faint film of sight debris still clinging near the knees, work boots that had been on his feet since 6 that morning. His hard hat sat on the passenger seat of his truck outside. He hadn't changed before coming here because he never had needed to. This was simply what the end of his workday looked like, and it had never once been a problem before. The teller, a young woman with a name badge reading Kimberly, glanced down at the check, then up at Terrence, then back down at the check. Something in her expression shifted. The brisk professional courtesy she'd offered the customer before him replaced almost instantly by something colder, more guarded. "I can't process this," she said. Terrence blinked. "Excuse me?" "This check." She held it up slightly, as though presenting evidence. $1 million. "You understand I can't just—" She looked him over again, deliberately this time, her eyes moving from his boots to his jeans to the polo shirt with the same slow cataloging scan of someone building a case in real time. "I'm going to need you to step aside. Actually, I need you to leave." Terrence kept his voice even. "I have an account here. I have an ID right there in front of you. The check is legitimate. Sir, I need you to leave the bank." She had no idea who she was talking to. In about 4 minutes, neither would her job. If something about this moment already has your attention, if you can feel the injustice building, hit the like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we tell stories like this one every single week. Drop your country in the comments and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. Now, let's understand exactly who Terrence Hall is and what that check actually represents. That morning had started, for Terrence, on a completed bridge retrofit site 2 counties over. The final walkthrough inspection on a project his firm had been contracted for 8 months earlier. He moved across the structure with the specific unhurried thoroughness of a man whose signature on an inspection report carried real, legal weight, checking load calculations against as-built conditions, running his hand along a reinforced support beam with the practiced attention of someone who had personally designed the retrofit specifications for exactly this section. A younger engineer on his crew, still learning the specific discipline required for this kind of work, asked a question about the tolerance margins on one of the connection points. Terrence stopped everything and answered completely. The same instinct for full, patient explanation he'd carried through 15 years of building Hall Structural Consulting from a one-man operation working out of the back of his car into a firm of 11 employees trusted with critical infrastructure work. The general contractor met him at the site office afterward, shook his hand, and handed him an envelope. The final payment on the contract. The culmination of 8 months of work that had started with a set of failing load calculations on an aging bridge and ended with a structure the county could certify safe for another 30 years. Terrence had checked the amount twice before folding it carefully into his shirt pocket. $1,004,211. The final installment on a contract his firm had earned through 15 years of unglamorous, technically demanding, physically involved work. The specific kind of expertise that didn't announce itself in a person's clothing because the work itself rarely required a suit. 15 years earlier, before any of this existed, before the firm, before the contracts, before the reputation that now preceded him in every engineering office in the region, a younger Terrence had stood in the lobby of a bank loan office in his one good shirt, waiting for an appointment he'd scheduled 2 weeks in advance to discuss startup financing. A receptionist had glanced at him, glanced at his shirt, and told him, without checking any schedule, that maintenance requests went through a different door entirely. He had left that day without correcting her, had found financing eventually, elsewhere, through a smaller community bank willing to take a chance on him. He had told himself, for years afterward, that the moment was simply one bad day at one bad bank, an outlier he'd long since outgrown the possibility of repeating. Present day, Terrence checked the check amount one more time, folded it into his shirt pocket, and decided, since the branch was directly on his route home, to handle the deposit before end of day rather than waiting until tomorrow. Back at the counter, Kimberly had not touched the check, had not run a single verification step, had not glanced at her computer screen, had not consulted a supervisor, had not once opened the customer account lookup that would have confirmed everything Terrence was telling her in less than 10 seconds. "Ma'am, I've banked here for 6 years, Terrence said, calm, direct, the specific measured patience of a man trained to explain complex problems clearly. "You can look up my account right now. It's right there on your screen." "I don't need to look anything up," Kimberly said. "I know what I'm seeing." "What are you seeing?" She didn't answer that directly. Instead, "Do you have any idea how often people try to pass fraudulent checks in here?" "I'm not going to be the one who lets this through. It's not fraudulent. Run it. Verify it. I'll wait right here." "I'm not running anything," she said, her voice climbing slightly, pitched now for the benefit of the growing line behind him, rather than just for Terrence. "I need you to step away from the counter." A handful of customers in line had stopped their own quiet conversations, watching now, the specific discomfort of witnesses who sensed something was happening but hadn't yet decided whether or how to intervene. Kimberly, now visibly aware she had an audience, escalated rather than reconsidering, the specific pattern of someone who had learned, across 4 years and one recent promotion to senior teller, that confidence delivered loudly read as authority regardless of whether it was correct. "Security," she called out, gesturing toward a guard stationed near the entrance. "I need this gentleman escorted out." The security guard, a middle-aged man who'd worked this branch for years, approached but hesitated visibly. Terrence hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a single threatening gesture, had simply stood at the counter holding an ID and a check. "I haven't done anything," Terrence said, still even, still calm, despite the specific tightening he could feel starting in his chest. "I'm a customer, trying to make a legitimate deposit into my own account." "You can explain that to the police if you want to keep standing there," Kimberly said. Something shifted in Terrence's expression then. Not anger exactly, but the sharp, unwelcome recognition of a wound reopening, a scene from 15 years earlier repeating itself almost word for word in a different lobby, with a different teller, and the exact same baseless certainty behind it. He took a slow breath. He didn't argue further. He took out his phone. "Right here. Before you see what happens next, subscribe if you haven't already. Because the next few minutes are the entire reason this story exists. Hit the bell. Drop your country in the comments. We're reading every single one. Now, watch what one phone call does. Terrence stepped slightly aside from the counter, phone already to his ear, the security guard hovering uncomfortably close now, the line of customers behind him watching openly, no longer pretending not to. He was a man who had built an entire company from nothing, whose signature on structural documents kept buildings and bridges safe for thousands of strangers who would never know his name. Standing in a public bank, being treated like a criminal suspect over a legitimate payment for work he had personally completed. This was the lowest point of Terrence's afternoon, not because anything worse was about to happen to him physically, but because the specific public indignity of the moment had become fully, completely real. Kimberly had not paused, had not apologized, had not once, in the entire exchange, considered that she might be wrong. The security guard hovered without acting. The line watched without stepping in. Nobody had said a word in Terrence's defense. The phone rang twice. Diane Cortez. "Diane, it's Terrence Hall," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "I need you at my branch. Now, if you can manage it." "What's happened?" "I'm standing here trying to deposit a legitimate check, and your teller has called security on me and is threatening to call police." There was a beat of silence on the line, the specific pause of a woman who had known Terrence Hall for 6 years and understood immediately, without needing further explanation, exactly how serious this had to be for him to make this call. "I'm 15 minutes away," Diane said. "Don't leave. Don't say anything else to her. I'm coming." Diane Cortez arrived in 12. She crossed the lobby with the specific, unhurried, unmistakable authority of someone who had spent 2 decades in banking and understood exactly how to move through a branch when something needed her direct attention. Past the line, past the hovering security guard, straight to Kimberly's station. "What's going on here?" Kimberly, watching a regional vice president materialize out of nowhere in the middle of her shift, straightened instinctively, her earlier confidence visibly faltering. "Ma'am, this customer presented a check for $1 million, and I had concerns about—" "This is Terrence Hall," Diane said, cutting her off, her voice flat and precise, carrying easily across the counter. "He's been a client of this bank for 6 years. His firm's accounts are managed personally by my office. I have his contact information saved in my phone, under call immediately." She looked down at the check, still sitting untouched on the counter, exactly where Terrence had left it. "Has this even been scanned?" "No, You refused to process a legitimate deposit from a 6-year client," Diane said, called security on him, and threatened to involve police, without running a single verification step. Is that an accurate summary? The color drained visibly from Kimberly's face, the specific horror of someone realizing, in real time and in front of an audience, exactly how badly she had misjudged the entire situation. Diane processed the check herself, scanning it, confirming the account details on her own tablet, the entire transaction completing in under a minute. The same deposit Kimberly had refused even to attempt. "It's done," Diane said, turning to Terrence, her voice softening considerably. "I'm sorry. This should never have happened. Not to you, not to anyone." "I know," Terrence said. Not cold, not performing forgiveness he didn't feel yet either, simply stating what was true and letting it sit there. Diane turned back to Kimberly. "You and I are going to my office. Right now." "Ma'am, I was just trying to protect the bank from—" Kimberly started. the last threads of her earlier justification still reaching for somewhere to land. "You weren't protecting anything," Diane said, her voice dropping quieter now, which somehow landed harder than shouting would have. "You looked at a client's clothes and decided he didn't belong here. That's not fraud prevention, Kimberly. That's the exact thing this bank has spent years training every single one of us not to do." The lobby, which had watched the entire humiliating exchange unfold in uncertain silence, now watched this reversal in that same silence. The specific reordering of a room that had just witnessed the truth catch up completely to a false assumption. Kimberly was walked back toward the branch offices, her posture entirely different from the confident, brisk woman who had called security 20 minutes earlier. Smaller now, visibly shaken, the specific collapse of someone whose entire justification had just evaporated in front of witnesses. The office door closed behind her and Diane. What happened in that room wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. By the time Diane emerged 15 minutes later, Kimberly's employment at the branch had ended. Not through the kind of public spectacle that would have simply mirrored the cruelty she'd inflicted, but through the same quiet, procedural accountability she had failed, entirely, to extend to Terrence when it mattered. Diane found Terrence still standing near the counter, deposit slip in hand, waiting patiently the way he'd been waiting the entire time. "Deposits confirmed," she said. "I'm going to personally make sure something like this doesn't happen at this branch again. I mean that, Terrence." "I appreciate that," Terrence said. "I really do." He paused, and something in his expression shifted. Not anger. Something closer to weariness. "But Diane, I need you to understand something. This isn't the first time this has happened to me. It's just the first time I had your number in my phone." Diane was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the full weight of that sentence. The specific, uncomfortable recognition that Terrence's version of a resolved afternoon had required a level of institutional access most people standing in his exact position would never have had available to them. "I hear you," she said finally, "and I'm going to think about that longer than just today." Terrence folded his deposit slip and slid it into his shirt pocket, next to the space where the check had been. "Thank you for coming as fast as you did," he said. "You shouldn't have needed to call me at all," Diane said. "That's the part I can't get past. You had a legitimate check, a legitimate account, an ID. You shouldn't have needed a phone call to a regional VP to get treated like an ordinary customer." "No," Terrence agreed. "I shouldn't have." He didn't say it bitterly. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, factually. A man who had spent enough of his life absorbing exactly this kind of moment to know that dwelling on the unfairness of it rarely changed anything faster than simply continuing to build what he'd already built. Terrence walked out of the bank into ordinary mid-afternoon light, the same light that had been sitting over the parking lot the entire time this had unfolded inside, indifferent to any of it. He crossed to his truck, hard hat still sitting on the passenger seat, exactly where he'd left it, and climbed in. He sat for a moment before starting the engine, looking at his own reflection briefly in the rearview mirror. The same face, the same work boots, the same company polo that had been sufficient identification for 6 years of banking at that branch, and had, for 20 minutes today, been treated as evidence of something criminal instead. He called his office, told his assistant the deposit had cleared, that the final payment on the retrofit contract was confirmed, that they could go ahead and process payroll for the crew this week, without the usual cash flow concerns. His voice, on that call, carried none of what had just happened. Steady, businesslike, already moving forward. Behind him, Inside the bank, the line that had watched the entire exchange slowly began moving again, the ordinary rhythm of the branch resuming its usual pace, except for the specific, lingering quiet of several customers who had just watched a baseless assumption get corrected in real time, and were, each in their own way, sitting with what they'd witnessed. If Terrence's story stayed with you, if you understand what it means to build something real and still have to prove, over and over, that you belong in the room you're standing in, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we bring you stories like this one every single week. Hit that like button if this one got you. And drop a comment below, where in the world are you watching from? We read every single one. And we want to know who's out there carrying stories like Terrence carried his. Until next time, competence doesn't need to announce itself. But sometimes, unfortunately, it still has to prove itself anyway.